Welcome to the last session for our first day of conference. So we will welcome Jane Tierney for this last session. Jane founded Purple Link in 2015, recognizing there's a better way to achieve superior results from supply chains. Clients discover innovative ways to identify dollars that leak through the supply chain, draining the bottom line. Through collaboration with stakeholders and suppliers, Purple Link's approach reduces both cost and risk, and clients sustain savings year over year. Jane holds a degree in industrial engineering and an MBA. Please welcome Jane.
Thank you, Liesl. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm very excited to be here with this team today. It's a very big honor for me, and I'm very excited about it, even though I'm in Los Angeles and it's very early in the morning for me, 7 o'clock. So I understand it's the end of your day, and I'm very excited to be part of the wrap-up. So let's just kind of jump into what we're going to talk about today, which is how we stop the dollars leaking through the supply chain. So when people talk about supply chain, they have these very odd ideas in their head about what is going on and what is not going on. So this is an example of what many people think about, and actually some of my own relatives think like this when I say I work in supply chain. They think of a big chain link, and it's moving things together, and it's basically tying everything up in knots. But we know that that's not true. So I have a couple questions for you today. One is, how does your organization define value or value add? I hope you have a very good idea of this. So if you don't, then you should think about this. Think about it in terms of your organization and what they define as value or value add. My second question is, what's the biggest value add contribution from your department or function to your organization, to your company? What's the thing that you do best and the thing that you can actually contribute the most to? And then what do your internal partners consider your biggest contribution? So when you look at your company and you think about where you are versus the other functions in your department, where do your peers, your stakeholders, where do they think your biggest contributions come from? It's important to think about that, because that's what we're trying to do in an organization, is we're trying to make a contribution and make our companies better. So we have a lot of things to cover today, but I want to give away some prizes at the end, and I'd like to stay connected to as many of you as possible. And so I want to make sure I give away these prizes, so I'm going to ask you right now to send me an email, because I know everybody's phones are right next to them. Send it to Jane at purplelink.co. There's no M there. And put in the subject line, SAPIX. And if you look at that and put that in there, then that will come to me. And at the end of this presentation, I'll do a drawing. So you'll get some slides from this presentation, and you'll also get some extra support and some extra resources. So here's our agenda today. And if you don't want to do that right now, I'll give you another chance at the end before I actually do the drawing. But go ahead and send me that email. So we're going to talk about 4 aspects of supplier management. We're going to look at organizational maturity, and I'll tell you why that's an important area. And then I'll look at 5 different skills for supply chain professionals. And then I'm going to give away the prizes. So I'm really excited to be part of this event and have this opportunity to share with you, because this is some things I've learned along the way. I'm going to share some tricks that I've discovered, some knowledge and some expertise, and talk about how I've been able to improve the bottom line of both my companies and my clients. My background, as Liesl said, is in industrial engineering. And truthfully, I'm a bit of a factory geek. I really never turn down a factory tour. And if you don't believe me, you can ask my husband, and he'll tell you all the myriad of places I've dragged him through. I started my career as a manufacturing engineer, and after working my way into management, I learned a couple things. One, that my engineering degree was a good foundation. But as a manager in industrial engineering, I needed to learn more about the business aspects. So I went back to school to get an MBA. And just about the time I was getting that MBA, my company sold off product lines and pretty much just closed the plant down. So less than a dozen people out of over 15,000 that worked there actually found jobs within that company. They just really didn't move anybody. So I looked around and found a job with Hewlett Packard. But the job they offered me was as a project manager in procurement. And I was like, I'm not a procurement person. But they needed somebody to work with suppliers with lots of different types of manufacturing to build parts for inkjet printers. It was a new product, and I very much like working on new products, and it was product management. And I'm good at project management and things I loved doing, both working with lots of manufacturing and project management. And it offered the chance to travel internationally and domestically, which really intrigued me. So I took that job. After it took me about a year to admit that I worked in procurement, I found that I really loved working with suppliers, being in and around different types of factories. And in the end, I found that I really found my calling. I worked for corporations for a lot of years, but in 2015, I left the corporate world to run Purple Link. I also teach classes in the California state system on operations and supply chain. And in all honesty, I wasn't all that great a student as an undergraduate and got a lot better when I got to grad school. And I found that good students learn what they need to know and hopefully a little more. If you're a curious perpetual student like me, you're going to encounter a lot of things you don't know. One thing I know for sure is that starting out as an industrial engineer, the faster, better, cheaper guys that are always doing that stuff, that prepared me to find processes, tools, and techniques to save money in the supply chain. But it also helped ensure that savings were sustained year over year. So I'm here today to share a model that I've compiled using some of those tools and techniques. And hopefully some of you will help me continue on that learning journey as well. So I want to start about talking about value and value add. These are terms that we hear all the time and probably use all the time. I know I do. They're heard around offices and they're used by just about everybody, companies and employees. And we're always looking to find products and services that add value to their companies to enhance your brand. Within a company, a lot of people intrinsically understand what that means. If you talk to other people in your company, you probably have the same kind of meaning and recognize that things give value. But outside of that circle and in a different company, value has a different meaning probably. So I'd like to ask you to put into the chat a couple of things that you think about when you think about value related to the supply chain. I've given you a graphic here to help trigger some thoughts. And then I'm going to show you some things that I think about. Again, if you can put some stuff into the chat, that would be great. So assurance of supply is one of the things that comes up a lot. There's things that come up when we're talking about supply chain. And really the thing that we're supposed to do is to make sure that there's supply there all the time, in the right place, in the right stuff, in the right place, in the right time, all of that kind of thing, right? That's what we do. So that's an important one. Then the metrics for assurance of supply, inventory, quality, all of those kinds of things apply for that. And then we look at financial contributions. So in supply chain, part of the value that we add is managing the cost and the expenses, managing material and labor costs of our suppliers, looking at the overhead costs and making sure we're not spending too much of the company's money managing that and getting that in, looking at inventory transactions, that cash to cash flow that we're always helping with. So that's an important part of that, financial contributions. Another area is really supplier management. That's what we do. In supply chain, part of what we do is manage suppliers. That includes things like strategic sourcing, contract management, managing the performance of all of the suppliers in the supply base. So it's really important that we do that. A fourth one is that's very important, that the way we add value is we are able to do things in a timely manner, and we're able to be responsive and to make sure our suppliers are responsive. We do that through managing lead times, cycle times. We try to reduce the order processing time. We try to optimize orders and bring the right amount in and make sure that we don't run out of things, back to the assurance of supply. And then finally, there's the strategic alignment. So that goes along with a lot of the strategic sourcing to make sure that we have the right suppliers who have the right goals and they align with our company so that everything is working together. That kind of looks like this. Here's some examples. As you can see, I've got this building from the bottom up, and a lot of that is more tactical types of things, up to the strategy type, because the value kind of goes up as we go up this pyramid. Strategies at the top, but the big foundation of assurance of supply, that's not very strategic, but if we don't do that well, we're not adding much value to our organization. So we really have to make sure that we're adding value to the organization through all of these things. And once you've defined what value means to your company, then you can start to work within your own supply chain to find the dollars that are leaking through there and put strategies and plans in place to recover those dollars and put them back on the bottom line. What's important with this next step is really knowing where to start, which suppliers are going to offer you the best opportunities. In order to find those dripping dollars, it's really better to start with the biggest opportunities. And supply chain professionals and companies typically use spend analysis for this. And it makes sense to use a Pareto approach, the 80-20 rule. You try to reduce costs with the suppliers that you're spending the most money with. And I always say that's a great place to start. But that's not enough. You really want to look at this as more than spend. Spend is important, but it's also not just a historical thing. You want to look at projecting into the future to say, what spend did I have last year, but what am I going to have next year and the year after? Do I have suppliers that I didn't spend a lot of money with that maybe are on new products that are going to be spending a lot more money with in the next few years? Did I spend a lot of money with a supplier that's phasing out that I don't plan to continue to spend that kind of money with in the next few years? So think about what your planned changes are and don't only look backwards, but project forward. Then you also want to look at those suppliers that are critical to your business. That includes both single and sole sources. It includes the ones that cause the most recent disruptions. It includes ones where you might have tools, where you might have intellectual property involved, whether it's the supplier's intellectual property or yours. It might be your intellectual property that they're making, so they have to protect your drawings and your specifications. It may be something that they make that's their intellectual property that you have used in your product, and you've certified your product around that. You've approved that. You've done all your testing. So if they're the supplier of choice for what's in your product, that makes them very important to you. Even if it's not worth a lot of money spend-wise, can be very critical for your business. The next area is risk, and this includes financial risk. So suppliers that might be at risk financially, that could be because maybe they've experienced a lot of tough times in the pandemic. It could also be that they're at risk of a takeover, of a merger. It may be that they're in the middle of acquiring or thinking about acquiring another company, which could help or hurt them financially and maybe just make some volatility there. Risk also comes in the form of quality. That's an important area to look at. How, again, those disruptions, what kind of quality are you experiencing from your suppliers? And then you want to look at performance and dependability. So performance exceeds more than just quality. That is one area, and that's a risk. But what about their dependability? What about their delivery? What about their flexibility and their agility? What about the responsiveness that they have? All of these things go into performance. What about the technology they have? Are they updating their technology to match what you need them to do? If not, they should do that. And then what about the business fit? Are they aligned with you? Are they working well with you? Are they somebody that you can influence and maybe uh, persuade them to do things that you need? Or are you a small company working with a huge company like Intel? Or are you a very large company working with a very small supplier that you can overwhelm them? So at Purple Link, we approach improving the bottom line with a model that I've constructed once you've identified those suppliers with the biggest opportunity. So let's take a look at that model. This model that I've created has 4 components. They focus in on key elements with those suppliers that you've reviewed and selected that are going to help you stop those dollars leaking. Let's look at these one by one. The first one is supplier performance. Just like I said, performance includes cost, quality, delivery, responsiveness, the business fit. But it also includes things today like social responsibility. Are they looking at sustainability? Are they looking at values like inclusion and environmental responsibility? Are they including that in what they do so that their performance is meeting your company's goals? Compliance is in this area, and compliance today with so many different types of requirements from all around the globe, that's in a very important area. Technology, I mentioned that before. Technology is an area of performance if they have the right technology and if they're doing what you need them to do and at the rate they need. And then the geography. Are these suppliers in the right place? I said earlier, I'm in Los Angeles and most of you are not, but we can still work together on that. But if there's particular geography that you need to serve for your clientele, for your customers, or if there's particular areas you want to be in to connect to those markets, that geography can be really important. The second quadrant is relationships. This is things like the length of time of doing business. Most companies that I've worked for and work with have a tried and true supply base that they've worked with forever, that they feel good about, they trust them, and that's great. And those things are important. But just because you've done business with them a long time, if they don't have the performance that you need, then you need to think about, is that really where you want your business to be? You want to look at who in each organization is the champion or the sponsor of that relationship, making sure that the two organizations continue to work together very well. What are your escalation paths? When you do have a problem, what happens? How do you handle that? How do you move through that? What kind of engagement do you have from your executive management and senior management levels? Is that needed? It probably is needed at some time, and you really want to make sure that your senior managers know which suppliers are important to you and why they're important. Are you doing business reviews and scorecards? Are you talking about sharing goals during those business reviews and understand what their goals are and yours are to make sure you've got that business fit? Are you doing things like concurrent engineering, where your suppliers are actually helping you during that development and prototype processes so that they're helping you launch your new products and be more productive in that way? Are you involving them in all of that kind of thing? Are you transparent about your goals and your expectations? And are you sharing information on cost requirements, and are they sharing cost models and their costs with you? That's what you need in this area of relationships. The next quadrant is going to be supplier risk. And we all learned a lot more about risk during the pandemic than we ever thought we would. So whether you're in South Africa or whether you're in Los Angeles, this pandemic has hit all of us in varying ways. And it's hit a lot of suppliers in varying ways. So risk includes things like capability. It includes capacity, how much you can make. Financial strength, how have you been able to muddle through the last year and a half, now going quickly to 2 years on this pandemic? What are your business continuity plans? What are your plans? And then have you actually had to execute any of those? Compliance, again, comes into risk because it's very important that you understand what the regulations are, import, export, internal to every country that you're working with. all the regulations, all the requirements. And then not even just the legal things, but the expectations of your own customers and all of the requirements that you have there. What about the impact of any issues you've had? And how about succession planning? This is an area that I think a lot of companies ignore, but especially for small businesses, succession planning can be a very, very important topic. And the last quadrant in this model is business skills, because you can have the knowledge of all of these things, but if you don't have the staff that can execute this, then that's not going to help your company. So you need supply chain skills. You need to look at demand management and forecasting, procurement, negotiation, S&OP plans, planning, logistics, and you need some strategic thinking too. You need to be able to make some complex decisions. You need to think about risk-based thinking. You need strategies, which are just plans, and they scare the heck out of a lot of people. But strategies are just plans to help you achieve your goal. So once you have that, then you want to look at these 8 aspects of what I call organizational maturity. You can find a lot of material about organizational maturity. Here's 8 things that I look at to say how mature is an organization. I look at the metrics they use. I look to see how sophisticated they are, how many metrics. You can have too many and you can have lots of charts that don't really tell you anything. So are they measuring things that matter? This is one of my favorite quotes is attributed to Einstein, and I'm not sure if he said this or not, but I love it because it says, not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that's measured matters. So you have to say, what matters to me, and how can I measure that when you're looking at metrics? There's a whole spectrum of reactive to proactive, and you want to look at the organization and say, where are you on that spectrum? Are we very reactive and very transactional, just reacting to the recs that we get to turn those into purchase orders? Or are we trying to be very proactive and put strategies and plans and looking down the line and looking at the next quarter and the next year and doing that planning collectively with our suppliers? Do we have some structure and processes in place? Actually documented processes that people are using and following and know where they are, not some process that was written up, stuck in a book, now on a shelf that's collecting dust, but people that are actually aware of these processes and using that. The financial perspective of the supply chain. Is this something that supply chain is looking at an ad, or is this where the organization looks at that and say, oh, they just handle the spend? And there may be a lot of spend, but do they contribute other than just managing that spend, like helping to drive value and increase the quality, the reliability, the products and services that our company makes? Talent management is another one. Do you have skilled people in the organization? Do your suppliers have skilled people in the organization? Are you training that talent and retaining that talent? So it's not all about attracting, but attracting, developing, retaining the talent to make sure that you have the skills that you need in the organization that are continually developing so you can do what you need to do to increase the value that you give to the company. Handling the supplier relationships, are they highly transactional, or do you have some actual relationships that include business reviews and sharing of goals? What's your company's appetite for risk? This is something that you want to look at for yourself and as well as your company. Some companies are very risk tolerant and they embrace risk. Others are very risk averse and they try to minimize the risk in their supply chain. And then where is supply chain in the company? Is it tucked under 3 layers of operations, or do you have like a CPO in your organization, a chief procurement officer that warrants a C-level position with the company because they realize that supply chain really is a very important part of making the company successful? So look at those aspects of maturity and see how that fits with you. In these 4 levels of maturity, I've also created this model where we have 4 levels. The first I call, again, assurance of supply. This is conventional procurement, highly transactional, but making sure that the parts are coming in when they are supposed to and the way they are supposed to. Very important level, but not a lot of maturity in an organization that's highly focused on assurance of supply. Then there's another organization level. Procurement, I call this. This is where you're doing some strategic sourcing, some category management. You're moving things along, but there's still a lot more that you can do within an organization. And then the third one, integrated supply chain. This is where you start to manage the performance. You start to have relationships and you understand that relationships differ from supplier to supplier. This is where you're really starting to see the value of what a procurement team can do and expand outside of procurement into a more supply chain focus when you're integrating that with your suppliers, with your customers, with your logistics, with your distributors, and your tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. And then finally, value management. And value management is where you actually have an organization where supply chain is viewed as a competitive advantage in your company, that you know that your supply chain is so strong that other companies envy that. If you think of companies like Coca-Cola, some of the PepsiCo companies, some of the other like Apple, their supply chain is really part of their organization. I say Apple not because they do any because they buy everything. They don't have any in-house manufacturing. And Tim Cook, if you don't know, who's the CEO of Apple, he came from the supply chain organization. So he understands that focus. And that's pretty rare to have a CEO that comes from the supply chain organization. So these 4 levels of maturity, none of these are good or bad, but it's important to understand where you are on that continuum to say, okay, here's where we are. Do we want to stay here? If you do, that's okay. If you'd like to move up, that's okay too. I wouldn't advise moving down very much, but maybe that's the best thing for your company or your organization or your function. But generally, I see companies and work with managers who assess where they are and then put targets in place for where they'd like to be in a year, 2 years, 5 years. Maybe you're a procurement type organization where you've got some strategic sourcing, a category manager or 2, but you'd really like to be more of that integrated supply chain. So then you say, okay, these are the initiatives we're going to put together. Maybe we're going to start to do some scorecards. Maybe we're going to put a relationship program in, a risk program. Maybe we're going to expand it in this way. It doesn't have to be all at once, but if you have that vision, that helps you move along that continuum. So when you put that together, that really looks like this. So comprehensive supplier management means you're setting clear expectations and requirements for your suppliers at any level and at every level. That you do have metrics in place that help you measure what's important to your company. That you have some suppliers that are committed and trusted and you're working with them closely to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. You have to have a willingness to collaborate with suppliers, and you have to have suppliers who are willing to collaborate with your company. That requires transparency in communication, sometimes transparency in cost and information. And you also have to have the skill sets in your organization that can manage all of that. I've worked with managers who have some pretty grandiose ideas of what they'd like to do, and they're very exciting. But when they look at their particular staff, they say, oh, I can't do that with this staff. So then you have to say, what do I do to enhance my staff? How do I build that up? How do I get the talent that I need in order to be able to do some of those? You want to train who you have and build on those skills. But if you have large gaps, then you need to figure out how you can augment that, how you can either enlist people from other organizations, do a couple of new hires, or add to that skill set in step functions so that you're not waiting for everyone that's in your team to come up to speed, which may take a lot longer than adding a couple of people in. But you've got to have the skill to do that. Then you've got to have this systematic approach. So we'll talk about skills a little more in just a few minutes, but it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that there's certain skills that you need to identify those savings. Back to where we talked about finding the dollars that are leaking through. You've got the suppliers that you identify, but you have to say which ones do we go after? Where are those savings? So skills are used, that term is a very generic term, but each organization, each company defines skills a little differently. For example, I have a pretty broad set of skills, but I use these with my clients because each of my clients is a little different. They have specific and unique challenges, and no one solution is going to fit them all. For example, one of my clients is in the defense and aerospace sector. They're subject to certain FAA regulations, which is here the Federal Aviation Administration. So when they make airplane parts, they have certain regulations they have to follow. Their products fly in the air, so there's a lot of safety issues and things like that around that type of production. I have another client that's in the cosmetic industry. Completely different set of rules and regulations, although there are regulations there as well. But another separate government agency here in the United States oversees those. It's called the Food and Drug Administration. So that you'd look at these and you'd say, what do they have in common? Well, actually, they both have inventory challenges, and they both have issues of obsolescence. The aerospace company can try to sell, reclaim, and recycle inventory that's not moving, that's aging and obsolete maybe, but the cosmetic company has to scrap those because if they exceed the expiration date, there's no use for that product, and you can't recycle those or reclaim those. So inventory challenges, yes, and you'd think, okay, there should be a systematic approach to that, but they're so different in their industries that you have to have a completely set of new perspective looking at that. It's a whole new way to solve those problems. So I talked about segmenting suppliers. There's also a process that you need to identify and prioritize savings opportunities. If you leave it to chance, you're going to win a few here, lose a few here, and probably be overall frustrated with your results or have your upper management frustrated with your results. So you're going to need to develop some standard approaches and processes. They're going to have some metrics along with measurement techniques. You're going to have some relationship processes like escalation paths, probably some tools like scorecards, quarterly business meetings, and things like that you're going to need in order to have this systematic approach. So you have to teach your people what they need. They have to have some skills. Then you have to put it in the context of your business. What's your business? What's your supplier's business? And how can you find the opportunities there? Look at this systemically. Use that Pareto approach. The 80-20 thing is a real phenomena, and it really does work. So find the best things and be prepared to use a variety of tools, because not one size and not one tool or one approach will work with all of your suppliers. So let's look at these supply chain skills. These are an important area because they transcend industries and companies. Each of these skills has both a hard and a soft side of that. So, for example, if you look at operations and supply chain, hard skills can be things like capacity planning, forecasting, but the soft skills may be more negotiation, relationship building. Business acumen, hard skills are like ROI calculations, payback periods, things like that. But also knowing the right questions is a softer skill. So what questions do you want to ask about business? And being able to influence people is a business skill, but that's a softer skill than calculating ROIs. In teamwork, most of these are softer skills, but also there's the hard skills of knowing who's on your team, selecting your team, making sure that you develop your team. and doing some of that work individually and making sure you've got some processes and a roadmap for development so that people see that and they understand how they can progress in the organization. Strategic decision making, this is a very big combination of hard and soft skills. You have to have some analytical skills, but you also have to have that appetite for risk understanding, and you have to be able to make decisions in a timely fashion. I've worked with some people who were great strategic thinkers, but they couldn't make decisions because they always wanted more and more data and wanted to think about things more. Engineers are notorious for this. They always like to tinker, and they're reluctant to say, okay, I'm done, move on. And other people jump to decision making before they've done all the analysis. Neither one of those approaches will give you the best decision. So thinking about how to do that is important, but also being able to make a decision and convince others to follow that decision involves both the hard skills and the soft skills. Relationship building, influence, this is, again, a lot of soft skills in this area. But if you don't have a process, if you don't have some documentation with that, you're going to be able to make a great deal, but if it's not documented and verified, then that deal may not hold up. So you want to be able to work this, and you also want to be able to repeat these results over and over, which requires a little bit of that hard skill, understanding what you are doing when you're building these relationships. And again, having a process that includes not only a one-to-one relationship, but involving that with other stakeholders throughout the organization. So supply chains are critical to a company's success. And what I know for sure is there's a better way to find those dollars that are dripping through the supply chain, draining that bottom line. Every company has challenges. And I know it sounds trite, but with challenges also comes opportunity. So if you can figure out where the opportunities are in your supply chain, that's what you want to go after. Looking at that from a variety of perspectives is really going to help you, not just at spend, but who's critical to your business, what's working, what's not, what do you need to keep doing, what do you need to stop doing, and maybe what do you need to start doing that you're not doing. So look for those opportunities. You need metrics. You need a basic set of metrics to start out first with a baseline and then track progress over time to how you're acquiring those dollars and putting them back on the bottom line. So you need to make sure that you've got ways to measure and that your suppliers are measuring things the same way you are. This is one of the biggest gaps that I see is you agree on a metric, maybe say on-time delivery, but the supplier's measuring on-time delivery by when it leaves their dock, and the customer's measuring the delivery by when it gets transacted into inventory. So there's a lot that can happen between the time it leaves a supplier's dock and it actually gets transacted into inventory. Not only the logistics and the transportation that have to happen in between, but also when it gets to the customer's dock, when is it unloaded? Does it have to go through some kind of inspection there? Is there a delay in that where it's even maybe just inspected against the packing list? Or is there a physical inspection that has to happen before it can be transacted into inventory? And then, so if you're not measuring it the same way, then you're not going to get the same result. And that doesn't even talk about things like floods and storms that prevent things. Yes, it left the supplier on time, but there was a weather issue or another kind of accident or act of God that kept that from getting to your dock at the right time. So how are you going to measure that? You need to set these clear expectations and goals with your suppliers. If they're not sure of how you're measuring them and what you're measuring and what's important to you, then you're going to be disappointed and they're going to be frustrated. So these clear expectations need to be set. And that goes back to my first question today, which is, what is value add for your company? If you don't understand the value add, then it's going to be difficult for you to set these clear expectations with your suppliers. And again, you're going to be disappointed with the results, and your customers are going to be frustrated because your suppliers are going to be frustrated because they think they're doing the right things, but they're not making you happy as a customer. Remember that suppliers are an extension of your operations. So the lawyers don't like to use the word partners, but suppliers are very much partners in the supply chain. So you cannot work without them. And every company, no matter how vertically integrated, has suppliers in one way, shape, or form. And then keep in mind that flexibility and agility really support success. So the next steps. Pursuing cost reductions and savings is eternal. I've never worked with an organization who doesn't have goals to reduce cost and increase their savings. But there are lots of types of savings that a company can get, not just price savings, but total cost. And there's a lot of literature that talks about this total cost. So look at where all of the costs are in your organization. And sometimes it's really difficult to navigate without support. So define the value add for your company and your supply chain. Keep an eye on the horizon. Don't look just at today, tomorrow, next week, but look out for 6 months, a year, a couple years. Where do you want to be? Think about the maturity, how you can move along that maturity curve. Think about those 4 quadrants of supplier management and where are you strong? Where can you use some improvement and move along in that area? And opportunity is always there. Take the first step. If you need some help or you want to talk some more about this, you can set up a free call with me. If you go to http://callwithjane.com, that will take you to my calendar, and I'm offering everyone in this session an opportunity to set up a free half-hour call with me to talk about how your organization can better go track these savings and move forward. So you can do that anytime. That will put you, well, we might have a bit of a challenge with the time zone, but the calendar adjusts for that and we'll figure something out. So you can do that. So now I want to give away the prizes and then I'm going to take some questions. So if you haven't done so and you want to be part of the drawing that I'm going to do right now, real live here, you need to email me to jane@purplelink.co and put SAPIX in the subject. And then I will pick a person. Today, you're going to get the slides from this presentation, so I will have them and be able to send those out. You're going to get a subscription to my webinar series. I do webinars twice a month. And if you can't do those live, there's no problem with that because I send out the slides and I send out a recording of that. And you'll have a subscription of those for now through the end of the year, actually. And you're going to get an Amazon gift card. So if you would like to do that, you need to send me an email right now to jane@purplelink.co with SAPIX in the subject line, and then we can do that. So if you'll do that, then I will pick a person to win. And I'm going to leave you with this. So what you do today can improve your tomorrows. So if you're needing to save money, if you're trying to find those dollars in your own supply chain, take some actions today because that can improve your results tomorrow and the day after and the day after. And now I will take questions.
Thank you, Jane. An area that's often neglected that you spoke about, and yet there's this large amount of company spend that happens with suppliers, and a lot can go wrong in a really big way. If anyone has a question, please can you put it in the chat box? There was one question from somebody, from Barry, that says, how has the need to communicate via technology rather than face-to-face affected your approach?
It has been a challenge because I'm a firm believer in face-to-face, and I'm a firm believer in traveling to visit suppliers and for suppliers to come and visit the customer. As a procurement professional, I very much value being able to go to the suppliers and actually see the manufacturing floor on a regular basis, which might be just annually or maybe once or twice a year. But when you can't do that, that's where the relationship really comes in. And if you know the supplier and been working with them, then you can do these Zoom meetings and you can do the virtual kinds of things, and that can help a lot. I've seen even virtual tours, and I've seen meetings where people take cameras out and actually film the process or the area that's having problems and share that across that. So it's a challenge, but it's something we can overcome, and just know that someday we'll be back to face to face.
Thank you. There's another question. Is there a correlation between supply chain maturity and the cost of the supply chain?
Not necessarily. You might think that there would be, but it depends so much on the business and what you're buying, and whether it's services, whether you're a heavy manufacturer, whether you have a heavy outsourced component, or whether you are very vertically integrated.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Can you comment on lean models and the negative impact on costs for the organization? We always talk about cutting out the fat from supply chains.
So we shouldn't cut the fat, we should cut the waste. There's a lot of companies had a lot of push to go to lean, and a lot of the influence or a lot of the focus in that was on very short, small inventories. Well, what they found during the pandemic is they got bit by that. So now sometimes they're going the other way and saying, well, we had 2 weeks of inventory, that wasn't enough, now we want to get 2 months worth. That's not necessarily the right attitude. So I think you have to go back to the lean basics, which are find the waste, not the fat necessarily, but the waste. What's not contributing? Because the fat can contribute in some ways. You may be able to lean that up a little bit, but you're really looking for the things that are non-value add. What is not giving you a return on what you're contributing with that step? Inspection is an area I always look at. You can't have no inspection, but if you're inspecting every step, then you're probably inspecting too much. So how can you get that right balance?
Okay, thank you. I always think about it that if you are too lean, you are too fragile. So we have to have some buffers or some protection somewhere.
Right. Buffers and cushions and all of those things are not bad.
Yeah. Okay. I don't see any other questions. So thank you very much. Would you like to continue with your draw?
Yes, I'm not seeing a lot of participants. That nobody wants the Amazon gift card that I'm giving away. I don't see enough to do this with, but I will continue to look. So yeah, emails good. If you want it, then that's great. Maybe it's my phone that's not working here. Oh, now it's going. Okay. So now I've got a lot. Let me see. Do we have just a minute so I can use my random number generator? That refresh button really works well, doesn't it? Okay, I'm counting. So the winner is Yash Patel. Are you still on? Because you need to be present to win. Woohoo! There he is. So congratulations. I will make sure that you get that gift card. It'll be via email, so I have an email for you. And I will send out the slides to whoever else sent me that and get you all set up for my webinars. Again, thanks for the opportunity to speak to this group today. It's been great. I wish we had more interaction. I miss that because I'd much rather talk to a live audience than this. But I've enjoyed it and appreciate your questions. Great questions.
Thank you so much, Jane, and thank you for sharing your years of experience with this group. Hope to see you at future conferences again.
I'd love to come back to and do one live. Thank you. Have a great evening.
You too. Bye.